This is Florence Foster Jenkins, widely considered to be the world's worst singer. But unbelievably, people were queuing up for tickets to her sold-out concerts. So what happened? Before she was the world's most infamous soprano, Florence was a prodigy, on piano. Born in 1868 to a wealthy family from Pennsylvania, as Little Miss Foster she played public recitals and even performed at the White House for President Rutherford B. Hayes. She begged her parents to allow her to study in Europe, but they said no. And so, at the age of 14, resentful towards her family, she ran away to marry Francis Thornton Jenkins, a man 16 years older. This did not meet the approval of her father, who cut off her financial support, and Florence entered the lowest period of her life. Her marriage was short-lived, ending after just 3 years, partly because she contracted syphilis, and she was left living alone in Philadelphia in near poverty, teaching piano to survive. The final nail in the coffin came when she suffered an arm injury in her late 20s, which ended any remaining hope of her becoming a concert pianist. So she pivoted. If she couldn't become a concert pianist, she would become a singer. There was only one problem. She couldn't sing. Around the year 1900, she moved to New York City, along with her mother. Now, unlike her father, her mother supported her, both in encouraging her to follow her dream, but also financially, at least as best she could. Now in her 30s, at an age when many singers start protecting their voices, Florence was only now taking her first singing lessons. But everything changed in 1909 when Florence's father died. His will left a substantial estate to both Florence and her mother, but there was a clause: no future husband could touch any of the money. Overnight, the biggest barrier to her dream, money, disappeared. With financial security and her mother's support, Florence went all in. She had more lessons, rented studios, and soon after met Claire Bayfield, a British actor who became her manager and would become a lifelong friend. The transformation from down-and-out piano prodigy to would-be soprano was officially underway. She may not have been able to sing, but Florence did have a few things going for her. Her piano training gave her a good understanding of music and repertoire, and her wealthy upbringing gave her social instincts and the ability to communicate with New York's elite society. Early 20th century New York saw a time when women's clubs and music clubs were booming, and Florence was the ideal character to direct many of them. This gave her experience securing venues, booking artists, and writing programs. Florence was soon a respected member of New York's musical elite. She didn't sing or play at these events, but they certainly helped to build her reputation. Florence had climbed from near poverty to a much-loved member of Manhattan's music scene. But of course, this wasn't what Florence really wanted. And this is where the story gets interesting. There's a myth that Florence was unaware of her shortcomings, but in reality, she was publicly very modest, both about her singing, but also for her role in New York's music scene. In 1917, after years of organising other people's concerts, Florence finally gave in to constant requests and founded her own club, the Verdi Club. She didn't create it to put herself on a pedestal. Instead, she saw it as a home for grand opera, at a time where it felt like it was slipping out of fashion in modern America, and as a place where gifted young Americans could perform. Membership was by invitation only, audiences were polite, and the evenings were carefully arranged. Florence handled the details and kept the focus on the music and other performers. Over time, as people learned that she was taking singing lessons, the club members began asking her to sing. And occasionally, when it was just a small number of loyal members, she would include a song or two on the program. But they soon discovered that Florence was a terrible singer. The reactions were different. Loyal members gave encouragement and applauded her, but Florence's performances also came with laughter, and word began spreading around New York that the much-loved Florence Foster Jenkins was the worst singer they'd ever heard. As Florence gained confidence and began singing even more, members would bring guests just to hear Florence, and those guests then told other people as well. Soon, people around New York were talking about Florence Foster Jenkins Not only is this much respected music director, but is a performer that you had to experience for yourself. Florence's singing was soon becoming a regular occurrence at the Verdi Club, and over time, more and more people became curious to hear her sing. In the early 1940s, she went beyond the privacy of the Verdi Club and made a small number of recordings. The recordings were intended to be sold to just members of the club, but copies soon began circulating around New York. And to the curious people who had never had the chance to hear her sing, it confirmed that the rumours were true. The great Florence Foster Jenkins could not sing. Eventually, curiosity outgrew Florence's control. And in 1944, after years of keeping things relatively private, Florence agreed to do something that was unthinkable just a few years ago. A public recital in the biggest, most prestigious hall in New York, Carnegie Hall. Tickets sold out in just 2 hours, 3,000 of them, and another 1,000 people who attempted to get tickets were turned away at the door. Her closest friend, Claire Bayfield, later said that before the concert, Florence's determination was clear. "I can do it. I'll show everyone." The programme was filled with many popular pieces, and in true Florence style, she offered a theatrical performance with elaborate costumes and dancing. But as the concert continued, so too did the laughter. One of those in attendance was the songwriter Cole Porter, who reportedly stomped his cane into his foot to hold his laughter. Another in attendance was Marge Champion, who was working for Disney at the time. "I was completely unprepared for the fact that she didn't mind in the slightest that everyone in the room was rolling with laughter." The next day's papers, however, were not so kind. The New York Sun wrote, "Much of her singing was hopelessly lacking in any semblance of pitch." But the further a note was from its proper elevation, the more the audience laughed and applauded. The New York Post wrote that it was one of the weirdest jokes New York had ever seen. But then came a shock that no one was expecting. Florence suffered a heart attack just 5 days after the concert and died only a month later. It almost feels like fate that she fulfilled her greatest dream just weeks before her passing, and lived the story from living in near poverty to selling out New York's most prestigious venue. The laughter wasn't hateful, she was a much loved member of New York's music scene. She just did things differently. People may say that I can't sing, but no one can ever say that I didn't sing.